Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. My guest this week is Stephanie McFall. She is the general manager of Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore here in Houston. If you've grown up in Houston, you've passed Third Planet a million times. It's that blue building along Highway 59, and it's a very, very fascinating story. So let's just dive right into it with Stephanie McFall.
I forgot I had myself on mute from a Bill and Ted viewing party the other day.
Oh my gosh, we could talk about Bill and Ted. Maybe
I did not get to watch the third one.
Okay.
I had Discord issues, but I got to watch the first two again, which is always fun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so
That's what we did for my friend's 35th was we had a streaming party.
yeah. Maybe we'll hold off on the Bill and Ted discussion, but who knows? On Geek Therapy Radio, we talk about all sorts of. We get off topic very easily because there's so much to geek out about. All right.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yep, it's one of the joys of being a geek. Our brains. I mean, we can go through. I rarely get bored. That's all I'm trying to say. Is I rarely get bored because I find so many different things interesting. That's not to say that we don't get bored, but. I would imagine working in a sci-fi shop that there's plenty to keep your brain at attention.
Oh, very much so. I was just telling someone the other day, I'm actually really behind on my reading because my eyes just get bigger than my stomach here.
Right.
As far as getting books go. And I'm trying very hard to stay on top of at least because I get single issues and graphic novels, and I'm at least trying to stay on top of my graphic novels,
right?
Because I think I'm too far gone on single issues. I've got stuff I haven't read in a year. Mm-hmm. Don't judge me.
Well, that's fine. So, it just means you have something to look forward to.
Yes,
exactly.
I'm going to keep looking forward to it because I'm a procrastinator and I just want to buy more books.
Oh, story of our life.
I feel like I've seen this before on the internet, but it's buying books and reading books are two very different hobbies.
Absolutely. It's the same thing with, I like to collect old computers and kind of vintage hardware stuff. And it's not so much that I'm going to integrate it into my daily life in the 21st century, but it's more so that I can go into my, geek cave and be like, oh, look at that sweet Atari ST 520, that Commodore 64. And it's fun to play with, but it's hard to find applications for an old 8-bit computer in the modern world.
Definitely.
The interface is
one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what do I do with this other than just show off that I have it?
Right. But you do have it in case you want to pick it up and read through it or play with it or just experience it. You have something tangible to hold on to and look at. So it's not just that it's a display piece. I mean, sometimes it is if you don't want to, touch the first issue of Superman or something like that and leave it encased in kryptonite or whatever. But if you have a second issue or a reissue, yeah, you can pick that up and read that and enjoy it. So it's not just about collecting the physical thing. Sometimes it's about enjoying it. I mean, I understand keeping in the packaging and displaying it, but sometimes we want to play with it a little bit if you can. So we've already connected, and we just immediately started getting into our geek discussion. Stephanie, can you introduce yourself and what you do at Third Planet Sci-Fi?
All right. Well, my name is Stephanie McFall. I'm the general manager here at Third Planet, and been here about 6 years now. Okay. So it's just continually fueling my interests in comics and all things nerdy.
Mm-hmm. When did Third Planet open? I've been here since 1989. So when did Third Planet open?
We opened in 1975. TJ started off in a little 300 square foot house off of Bissonnette. Mm-hmm. And then I think in the early 90s, he moved to the iconic blue building off of 59 that everyone knows.
Yep. I've driven by it. It's a Houston staple. I mean, and that's an understatement to say it's a Houston landmark.
Yeah, everyone knows the blue building.
Absolutely.
They may not know what's inside it, or they may not have visited, but if you're oh yeah, I'm in the blue building, they know.
Right. So what's the history of Third Planet and kind of how did it come to be?
TJ, the owner, was in the military when he was much younger. He just had his 70th birthday in July.
Oh, happy birthday.
And while he was overseas, the big thing was, collecting and trading comics with, his fellow servicemen.
Yeah.
And he fell in love with it. And when he got back to the States, he kind of went into the oil and gas business as a drafter and some stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, I got laid off one too many times from oil and gas. So I just decided to start my own comic store. And he'll tell you, like, the elevator pitch is, this is a hobby that got very out of hand.
Right.
So.
That's really cool. And what is the saying? Find something you love to do and you never work a day in your life. I'm sure there were struggles along the way, but I bet you TJ is. I would imagine he's very proud and very happy that this is his life's work. Would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think this and bowling are the two things he's most proud of.
Bowling. Oh man,
yeah, he is a nationally ranked senior bowler.
Nice. That's awesome. My
bowling and comic books.
That's right. My aunt was a women's PGA, women's pro bowling, PBA, whatever. So she would go bowl in Las Vegas and in tournaments, and she was on TV back in the 80s. And she taught me how to bowl. And I would like to bowl TJ one day. That'd be fun. I need to get more into bowling. I used, not to toot my own horn, but I used to average in my prime over 200, which is a skill that's not
bad.
It's not bad at all. I mean, that's competitive. That means if I would have stuck with it, I could have, I don't know what career bowling would have, but it was fun. It's kind of one of those, what's something interesting about you? Well, I used to average 200 bowling, for whatever that's worth. But no, I really love bowling, and I like going bowling on my birthday and stuff. So I would probably only go once or twice a year. I need to go more. Why'd you get me started on bowling? Let's get back. Let's get back on track a little bit here, because I know there'll be more tangents. It's Geek Therapy Radio. Of course there's tangents. There's so many geeky things to talk about. Coming up in the next segment, we talk about how Third Planet is so much more than a comic book store. You might think, they only have comic books inside of there. That's not the case at all. It's Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore. It is a collector's paradise. So we're going to get more into that coming up here on Geek Therapy Radio. My guest is Stephanie McFall, General Manager of Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. My guest this week is Stephanie McFall. She is the general manager of Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore, a Houston institution for decades. If you've lived here for a while, you know the blue building on 59 I'm talking about. Let's continue the conversation with Stephanie McFall. It's called Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore, so obviously it's more than comics, isn't it?
Yes, we've got toys and gaming and some science fiction novels. We're the only store still in town that does vintage Disney collectibles. Mm-hmm. We've got a little bit of everything for everybody. That's cool. So,
gaming, is retro gaming? Can you talk to that a little bit more?
So predominantly tabletops, board games, things like that. Lots of vintage D&D stuff. Not crazy old. Like, I'm not going to have like a first edition lying around, but we'll have some older manuals and campaigns and things like that for people to look for. And that's, especially with like D&D kind of seeing like a big resurgence with like in pop culture, because like shows like Stranger Things and stuff where they're like normalizing D&D again. It's really nice to see people getting back into that sort of like fantasy role play gaming aspect.
Did you ever watch the show Freaks and Geeks?
Years and years ago.
Yeah.
I haven't done a good thorough rewatch of it. I think it's on think it's on Hulu. I need to add it to my list.
It might be on Hulu. It was on Netflix for a while. It's one of those, streaming services. It jumps all around from one service to the next. But there's sadly, Freaks and Geeks was only a 1-season show for some reason. It was freaking great. But there's a
lot of good shows that are just a single season, maybe two. So
yeah, Firefly and everything. So in Freaks and Geeks, there's an episode where the younger boys are getting into Dungeons and Dragons, and people are calling them geeks and stuff like that. And then Daniel, the cool guy, he gets into it, and it was kind of this cool thing where you don't have to be a certain type of person or stereotyped any certain way to enjoy something. In this case, of course, it was Dungeons and Dragons. But one of the main tenets of my show here, and I kind of joke around with this phrase, is that geeks are sexy. It's no longer that being called a geek means that you are some sort of social outcast, because it turns out the motto of my show is that we are all geeks about something. It just means you're passionate about things. So you can be a geek about classic cars. You can be a geek about bodybuilding. You can be a geek about art. You can be a geek about, I don't know, radio broadcasting, whatever. The term geek just means that you are so lucky to have a passion about something or about multiple things. So just because you are a high school jock doesn't mean you wouldn't enjoy D&D if you gave it a chance. So,
well, I think especially with D&D, the ability for it to appeal to everyone kind of stems from the fact that, like, you don't have to be yourself in the game.
Exactly.
You're reinventing who you are anyway. So you don't have to be a certain person to enjoy reinventing yourself temporarily for a good old bout of escapism.
Right. Exactly. And so I love that in the 21st century, it's becoming less of a stigma. I mean, if you say you're into D&D or something that would be considered, in the 80s popular, stereotypically geeky in the 80s, now it's hip and cool.
Especially in the 80s when it's the whole like satanic panic thing where it's not only are you a geek, but like you're a dangerous person. It's like, I've seen the people that come in and like buy my D&D stuff. Yeah. Like I'm not worried about them.
Right. Exactly.
They're nice people.
Exactly. All right,
I've actually got a lot of kids picking it up. That's like their extracurricular activity now is D&D. I've got teachers running campaigns. I know the Houston Public Library is using like role playing in general as a way to like discuss world building and character creation for creative writing.
Wow. So, that's really, really, really cool. It's such a fantastic tool. Exactly. I'm stoked to hear about that, and I want to look into that a little bit further. But for now, I want to move down the list a little bit. I'm not in a huge rush. Are you in a? I'm more considering your time.
You're good.
All right. So, what are your favorite items that you currently have, or that you've seen come through in the past that you thought, oh man, I would really love to have that?
I have seen so much stuff come through the door, and I'm a very like particular collector myself, but there's definitely stuff that like I have enjoyed people like watching people like freaking out over. In the 6 years I've worked here, I have seen 3 Amazing Fantasy 15s, one of which we still have on sale here at the store. This one is signed by Stan Lee.
Wow.
We were really fortunate. We got him to sign it at Dallas Fan Expo about 8 months to a year before he passed away. It was the last time he ever came to Texas.
Has he ever been through the doors at Third Planet?
No, he is not. But we have had a lot of celebrities. We've sold comics to Patton Oswalt, Travis Scott, Nina Flowers. I don't know how much of a RuPaul Drag Race fan you are, but the season 1 winner.
Nice.
And TJ years and years ago, back when Lakewood was actually still the Summit and had the Rockets. Yeah. TJ's sold comics and toys to Yao Ming. So
cool. When Pat were you there when Patton Oswalt was coming through? Because I know
it was actually a slow day, and I looked up and he was just sitting at my counter like, hey, can you help me find some books? And I was like, sure.
Did he? So he liked the store? He was into it?
Yeah, he thought it was pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
we try not to like
Freak out.
get too starstruck with celebrities we come in. We want to treat them,
Yeah.
just like we would treat every other customer, with courtesy and
Oh, of course.
and make sure they're getting taken care of. So.
Right. I just know Patton Oswalt is very famously a huge sci-fi and comic book aficionado, if you will. He's huge into it. So that's really, really cool. Looking at my list here, there's so many things. There's a question that I didn't write down that I meant to write down, and I'm glad I remembered it. Do you host many local artists or local writers' works?
Lots, yes.
Awesome.
Right now, this year, obviously, we're not going to really be doing, much of anything as far as like events and signings, just
Right.
because, trying to maintain social distance and make sure that everyone's safe and crowd control and all that.
Of course.
But yeah, we do host like a lot of signings and everything. We actually do predominantly local creators because I want to make sure that I'm like, as the manager here, that I'm giving a platform to the local people that like, the creators that make Houston awesome and make,
Right.
The Houston geek community special.
Right.
But also like, how are you supposed to become a big name like Todd McFarlane or, Neil Adams or, Gail Simone, if someone's not giving you a chance
Right.
to showcase your stuff first and foremost, like
Right.
you have to give the locals like a platform to help grow their career. And,
Absolutely.
if that helps us grow as well, that's great.
That warms my heart to hear that there are still effectively mom and pop institutions around with such a heritage like Third Planet that do give local artists a chance, that take them under their wing and say, you got something good here. We believe in what you're doing here. We're going to give you a shot. We're going to give you some space in our store. So that's wonderful to hear. And I'm glad I remembered to ask that question. That's quite possibly one of the most important questions I could ask in this interview.
And I mean, like I said, and it helps us too, because, let's say one of our local guys gets big.
Right.
And they can look back and say, like, I got my start by coming in one weekend at Third Planet. And that makes us look really good because, that shows like, oh, this store was in on the ground floor for this hot new creator.
Yep.
They must know something about like, about like the local comic scene. It's
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, we've been doing this for almost 5 decades. So
Yep.
we know.
Houston may very well be the home to the next Stan Lee. It is such an awesome community of creators here. I love living in Houston. But what if you're not a creator and you're just looking to get into comics but don't know where to start? Because there's a ton. Advice on that coming up. Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Oftentimes, we scroll through 1,000 channels of TV and then say, there's nothing on. And we can feel that way looking at the comic book scene. There are thousands upon thousands of comics. Where do we start? How do we start? We continue the conversation with Stephanie McFall, General Manager of Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore. So, we were talking about the creative side of things. What advice would you have for someone who is just getting into comics? Someone who has been fascinated by comics. Maybe they haven't read any comics, but it just seems like a hobby that they might find fascinating. But as you mentioned prior, there's so much out there that even if you are already into comics and you've been into comics for 20 years, that it just piles up and there's so much. So, to somebody green, the new person coming in, doesn't know where to start with comics, would you have any advice for them on kind of where to start?
Well, it's something that I've actually noticed, even within like the last few years, is there are two kinds of people who want to get into comics. There are people who genuinely want to find enjoyable stories to read and follow and worlds to explore and things like that. They're like the reader collectors. They actually want to engage with comics.
Right.
Then there are the speculator and collectors, where they only want to get into comics in a monetary and financial gain value.
Right. Make a buck. Yeah.
So I've kind of got like two separate starting point advices,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah.
So for people who are new to reading comics and want to get into comics for the reading and and enjoyment of it that way, first and foremost, find a title that that engages you. Don't feel pressured to finish a title you're not jazzed about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't do that to yourself. You're just gonna make yourself dislike the medium if you do it that way.
True.
But find something you're jazzed about. Don't be afraid to ask for suggestions. With a lot of titles being now shows or movies on streaming services, there's a lot of like really fantastic jumping on points. So like, let's say you like Umbrella Academy and you didn't know it was a comic book.
Yeah.
Come in and check out the comic book. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Same with The Old Guard. That movie hit Netflix, and I'm selling through the trades faster than I can keep them in stock.
Wow.
So, but then, like I said, conversely, you've got the speculation and financial gain collectors, and especially here at our store, where we've got a pretty like wide variety of comics to choose from. You can't just be going through the 50-cent bin and assume you're going to find gold and strike it rich and like pulling over on us, because we know what's in the 50-cent bin and it's there for a reason, you know?
It's the internet age. I mean, there's information about everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but I mean, if you're looking to collect, just like I said, for a financial collection point, you kind of have to be willing to put some money up front. You're going to want to get older books and older titles that are going to be, like I said, like they're going to cost you a little bit of money up front, but that's how you gain that value over time, is you've got to be able to be willing to take a little bit of a financial loss up front in order to see gain later. Right. So you can't assume like a $6 comic is going to be worth $6,000 in a decade, but maybe that $300 book will be worth $800 one day, Right. It just depends.
Right. It's the return on investment. If you invest a little more, there's more risk, but there's more potential for a return on that investment. And yeah, you just have to do your own research. It's kind of like back in the day collecting baseball cards or sports cards. And we would sit there at the card shop, which also, as it would happen, sold a lot of comic books too. And the hope is you would go buy a pack of cards, and then you'd look through the Beckett. I don't know if they still have the Beckett, but it was the values of all the cards. And then you go back to the shop owner and be like, will you buy this card for me for 50 cents? And the whole goal of it was that, oh, wow, I got this awesome Nolan Ryan baseball card, and the Beckett says it's worth $10, and then you'd go to the shop owner and say, I'll give you $4. But that was fine, because now we could buy a whole nother pack or packs of baseball cards, and when you're 9 or 10 years old, it was great. So when you grow up a little bit and you have a little bit more age and wisdom, and maybe hopefully some financial resources, if you want to do a similar thing with comic books, what you're saying is you have to be willing to, and if you want more of a return, you have to be willing to invest a little bit more. A 50-cent comic book is very low likelihood of becoming a $500 comic book, whereas a $100 comic book may, in the next few years, it might become a $500 comic book, because it's already demonstrated that. And especially with how the movie market's going, there's always like a little bit of boom with each new movie, new show, like, oh, I'm looking for the first appearance of Punisher, I'm looking for Captain Marvel, I'm looking for this storyline of Batman, I'm looking for Infinity Gauntlet, and there's always like a little bit of hype. I just had someone the other day looking for the first Morbius, because that movie got announced and things like that. So it's just, you've got to know kind of when to throw your money on the hype train, right? And when to cash in and jump off. So but I mean, that's the financial collecting side. I mean, I will always lean towards, first and foremost, suggesting reading like collector reading. Like, pick something that you're going to enjoy actually opening and engaging with and reading.
because that to me is the best kind of collecting, is to actually physically engage with the story.
Right.
And not just to have something on a shelf to say, yes, I have this.
Right. And I agree. I think that's the best advice, is look for something you enjoy that you can get enjoyment and fulfillment out of, being a part of the story. If it's something that touches your heart and you can engage in, I think that's kind of the best way to go first. And then, I mean, ideally, that'd be the first thing. And then as your passion grows for it and you start becoming more knowledgeable at it, with it, and if you want to get into investing it for maybe making $1, I think it would help greatly to enjoy the format first and become knowledgeable about it, and then take that risk. It's a more educated investment, I guess you could say. All right, moving on here a little bit, and we're almost done. I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
No worries.
Do you have a favorite memory or a fun story from working at Third Planet? Something that pops in your mind? There's probably tons, but something that just comes to mind.
Yeah, so one of my favorite memories is like the first weekend I started working here. TJ kind of had me on like, general grunt work projects, and I was sorting Transformers.
Cool.
And he would just bring me like boxes and boxes of like vintage Transformers, and he's like checking for completion. And I think that was, one of like the funnest things, because I just remember like going through just all these boxes of toys that I remember like my friends having when I was little.
Yeah.
And just like really like feeling that big wave of nostalgia. So.
And you still feel that? You still get to feel that?
Oh yeah, like every time I come in, you kind of get like you go back in time a little bit, and then we always get customers who come in, oh, I remember this from my childhood, or like I had that growing up, or that's still in my mom's attic. I can't believe like, she's still got it, and I can't believe it's worth them. So it's always like so fun to basically help people like kind of relive like happy childhood memories. So
here's a kind of a philosophical follow-up, and it may be a rhetorical / loaded kind of question. What do you think the kick is? Because I know exactly what you're talking about as far as that nostalgia hit. What do you think the appeal is? What do you think people are feeling when they see that Ninja Turtles action figure from 1989 that they remember they saw at an HEB? Do you think it's... I have a theory, but I want to hear yours first. Do you think it's they have nostalgia for that action figure itself, or do you think it's more attached to they remember the people they were with, they remember the people they loved, they remember kind of that time of life? So it's not so, to my theory is that it's not so much that specific piece, but it's a connection. It's like an instant tie, and it releases these chemicals in your brain that puts you back to those, those memories. It's not just a fun nostalgia thing. It's actually a connection to the past. But
I honestly think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a gentleman probably in his 50s come in the other day, and he bought one of our vintage Star Wars play sets. He bought the original Droid Factory.
Cool.
And he was holding it, and he was like, I begged and begged my parents for this for Christmas one year, like the year it came out. And he was like, and they could never afford it because we were really dirt poor growing up.
We've all heard the saying, don't meet your heroes. But when it comes to nostalgia and toys and old computers, sometimes meeting your heroes is actually the greatest thing ever, because you remember those Christmases or those birthdays where you didn't have the means to get that toy you wanted. And then once you finally get it as an adult, it's greater than ever. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. One of the great geeky debates when it comes to toys is, do I play with it or do I leave it in the box? Well, here's some advice from Third Planet Sci-Fi Superstore's general manager, Stephanie McFall. Let's continue the conversation.
You have all these people who look at, like, especially with vintage Star Wars, oh, I never knew that was going to be like $500, $1,000 if I'd kept it on card.
Yeah.
I should have taken better care of my toys. I was like, well, then if every single child took great care of their toys, it would be worthless. Like, play with your toys, take them out of the box, pose them, have fun, stick them in the bottle rockets if you want. Yeah. But like, it's just, you enjoy a toy however you want. If you want to leave it on the card and put it on your wall, that's fine. But if you want to strap it to some black cats and blow it up and singe it into your pavement, that's fine too.
Yeah, melt it with magnifying glass. That's all. That's all good. Oh man. So what do you think the future is for Third Planet?
We've got a lot of people bringing in, their kids and grandkids. So there's definitely that next generation interest in toys and comics and collectibles and things. So it's as long as we keep encouraging, new readers, new collectors, we'll be around another 45 years easily.
Absolutely. Anything that stimulates the next generation's imagination. And not to say,
yes,
I'm about to be a dad in the next couple months here. It's, people can raise their kids, they're going to raise their kids, and I'm going to raise my son, I love technology. Don't get me wrong. I've got my iPad. I have more computers than I can count. There's more screens for me to look at than I can count, and I'm 37 years old. But it kind of also scares me that my son could potentially have his face buried in a tablet. He doesn't have to. I would raise him a little bit more to enjoy the outside world a little bit more. Not that I would keep him. I'm not going to be a Scrooge with the tablet or whatever, but the idea of having him read a real comic or play with a real action figure and not just be watching kids' YouTube 24 hours a day or whatever. The idea of bringing my son to a comic book shop is very exciting, and I'm happy to hear that new generations are being brought up like that. Well,
especially like with digital comics versus paper comics,
right.
There was this whole initial fear of, digital will replace paper. And I'm like, not with a physical medium like comics, not with like collectors or, you've got people who are like, I like the feel of it. I like the smell of it. The layouts are better on physical paper because it looks so weird on a screen, or they cut stuff off, or it's hard to follow a storyline.
The smell of the paper
and dialogue. Yeah. And it's just, there will always be room and there will always be a precedence for physical.
Absolutely.
In comics, and that's not anything that's going away.
No. And in a way, I would think digital comics would help physical comics, or at least there'll be a space for both. And case in point is with streaming music. Yes, streaming music is great. MP3s are great. That's all great. But records keep seeing, like vinyl records, keep seeing year after year increases in sales. They have skyrocketed, just vinyl records, because people.
It's so interesting that it's vinyl. Right. Of all things, because that's definitely several iterations of physical music removed from what's currently available.
Right.
So it's interesting to see not just a I don't want to say reversion, but it's not. It's interesting to see that the interest in physical music media is less about CDs and what's modern,
right,
but more into that vintage. And again, that goes back to the collector culture, yes. like with comics, where it's like people are looking for, some older books too. And it's, the new ones are great, but they also want to make sure that like they're getting the old classic stuff that everyone really likes.
Yeah. So
that everyone's going to be like putting in the movies and on the shows and everything.
Right. So the physical comic book and action figures and any other sort of sci-fi collectible, it's not, maybe it won't be what it was in the 1970s or the 1980s, but it's not going anywhere. People, are you still there, Stephanie?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, I heard a connection thing. People thought, I don't know if you've heard or been paying attention to at all the plight of GameStop and the idea that the physical, people buying physical video games, buying the physical discs, the Blu-rays or whatever for the games for the PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4, new Xboxes.
When everything can be downloaded and straight to your system now. Yeah, I mean, I have a Switch Lite and I downloaded Animal Crossing instead of purchasing it, so I'm aware.
Absolutely.
Because even back when I had a DS, I was buying each physical game.
Right.
Where the hell do I store those?
Right. So
they're not big, but they add up.
Exactly. So my only point here is that, yes, GameStop may fail. That corporation may fail here in the next few years, go bankrupt because of digital downloads, because of Steam and everything is you can download digital. But I think the disconnect, and this is going to be tied with comic books in any physical format, is that let's say there's a national chain of comic book stores that's going to go under because they are basically so big that they're going to collapse underneath, their own debt, basically, because of digital streams. Well, that doesn't mean that Third Planet or any other small little mom and pop brick and mortar, sole proprietorship is going to necessarily go down. Yeah, they might suffer, and there's going to be certain aspects that are unique to having a sole proprietorship. But just because GameStop is going down doesn't mean that there won't still be brick and mortar stores where you can go in, small ones, and still purchase physical copies of things. So I think there's always going to be Third Planet where you can go buy physical copies of comic books and memorabilia. And I just want to get your take on that.
I mean, the one thing that threatens, well, not the one thing, but one of the big things that threatens comic book stores is lack of diversification in product. And this is something that even TJ came under fire for way back in the day when he was selling comics. And he's like, well, I'm going to sell t-shirts and toys too. And everyone was like, that's stupid. You're a comic book store. You should stick just to comics. And he's like, no, I'll have some Batman shirts. I'll have some Superman toys. I will start importing model kits from Japan because those are kind of taken off, Yeah. And, what he's seen, in the 45 years, he's seen stores come and go that all they wanted to do was sell the new comics, the new stuff. They're like, we don't even want to have back issues of old stock. There's no point. We don't want to have the overhead. So, but he's diversified his product offerings for so long that even as comics, rise and dip in popularity, or, as kind of people are, switching to digital here and there, there's still enough physical product here for people to select from.
Right.
That we more than make up for any of those hiccups with the new comics.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, where's Third Planet located for somebody who has seen the blue building? I don't know. Maybe they know. You have to do this in any sort of broadcast. You have to give the actual physical location. And where can they find you online?
We are at 2718 Southwest Freeway on the north side of the freeway. We're about halfway in between Kirby and the Buffalo Speedway. Like you said, bright blue building. You can't miss us.
Yep.
Pardon me.
Bless you.
Online, your best bet is to find us on Facebook. You can search for Third Planet Online. We also have an Instagram that's at Third Planet Comics. Those are the two that we update most frequently with store news and new product and weekly releases for comics. Those are your best ways to get a hold of us.
Wonderful. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You need to download the podcast, of course, in the iHeartRadio app, or you can go to geektherapyradio.com. There's so much more we talked about that we can't fit into a 39-minute radio broadcast. So go check out geektherapyradio.com for podcasts and more information. You are worthy of love. You're worthy of giving love, receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening. Are you a small business owner and you'd like to support Geek Therapy Radio? Go to geektherapyradio.com and let's chat. And now the extended interview that wouldn't fit in the broadcast. Enjoy. All right, so I'm going to cut the recording there, and everything after this is
okay, cool.
Just us talking. Yeah, so that was awesome. I know we could have talked for 4 hours easily. It's so easy to talk about this stuff for hours at a time. So
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even get into, all the pickup in business with, Chadwick Boseman dying,
Yeah.
or when Stan Lee passed away, when Carrie Fisher passed away. You have all these unfortunately tragedies that bring people to us for, again, that sense of nostalgia, that sense of community. Like, I want something with their face on it. I want something that reminds me of this person that
Right.
I looked up to or idolized. So it's always interesting.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely talk about that in the near future.
Yep. So
All right. Well, awesome, Stephanie.
yeah, because I'm real worried that Patrick Stewart's,
Yeah.
that's going to be the next one I see in my lifetime. And I'm like,
Man.
don't you dare, Patrick Stewart. Just take
know.
multivitamins or something. Lock yourself in a bubble.
I was thinking that the other day. He's doing the sonnets that he releases like almost at least weekly on Twitter.
Yeah,
I'm just
sorry
thinking,
about that. That's my
No, it's all good.
Yeah, he's doing those, and then I know Ian McKellen has been doing a lot of like social media stuff too. So
we don't like to think about. Well, we'll deal with it. And
No.
we'll mourn when we need to.
yeah, yep.
We'll enjoy it.
But I just, that's one of those things that every time a famous celebrity death, especially one that so heavily affects the geek community, happens,
Right.
You kind of start like mentally thinking in the back of your head, like, oh God, who's going to be next that like we are going to have like product for? And that's such like a horrible, morbid thing to think, but it comes in. It's one of those little intrusive thoughts.
Well, I mean, it keeps the memory alive. I think it's one thing to, let's say, people profit off of human suffering like 9/11, or if somebody was selling Beirut t-shirts for $30 a piece, but it's another thing to, hey, this celebrity, a celebrity that geeks grew up with died, and this is going to hit. So we want to make sure that we have, because these people aren't coming in there to make you rich. They're coming in there so that they can have a connection to that icon, that person, that memory.
And that's one of the things that like when Carrie Fisher passed away, we pulled all of the like Princess Leia statues and figures and like anything with her face on it, and like kind of put it front and center. We're like, hey, if you need something like to remember her by, like, here's your stuff. Like, we're not trying to profit off of it, but
right.
Like when Chadwick Boseman died, like we were like, here's what we've got left of Black Panther, this is stuff that y'all can come get. And it's always so interesting to see. It's a different, I think it's the different grief processing
right
thing, and I even had customers, especially with Boseman, be like, I feel like I lost a family member, and this is someone like really important to me. So to see them channel their grief into a I don't even know what you'd call it, like into not like a talisman, but into a physical shrine item. So,
I was going to say shrine, but it's
like a physical memorial item.
Totally. I 100% get what you're saying. I mean, we do that with our own family members. There's things that with our own family members, they're pretty much useless, but it's like that one thing, I'm not going to throw away that one thing, because that one thing still attaches me to grandma. Like, she used this thing. I can use this thing. You don't want to keep everything. Like, you're going to throw away most of the stuff in their garage, but like, you still want one thing, at least one thing to hold on to and have a physical connection with that person's memory. So, and in comic books and collectibles, that's why they're collectibles, is exactly for moments like these. When they're no longer with us, when Stan Lee's no longer with us, we're going to have his body of work and have physical connections to his legacy, and that way he never dies. Yep. Yeah. It's immortalization in, collectible form. Yep. I think I'm going to add the stuff we were talking about here to the bonus content of the podcast. the radio show is very strict time limit, but I can add this stuff to the end of the podcast. Yeah. And I'll tell my listeners on the broadcast, hey, we got to a bunch of other stuff that we just couldn't fit for time. So go check out the podcast and get the, 10 or 15 minutes of
For
bonus.
the podcast, do y'all do any sort of like Patreon special perks episodes?
I do for my own thing, and I was thinking that's always the short answer is yes. When I do extended length interviews, I do stuff like that. But for me, it kind of depends. It's case by case what I put behind a paywall. And
that's understandable.
And so I'll have to decide whether or not I do that with this. I don't think so, because sometimes I think we talk about things that are so important, I don't want to put them behind a paywall or something that's so touching. I don't.
Yeah, and especially with that. So
right. So I'll probably just include this on the podcast. But in the podcast, I mention my Patreon, and I have a link to my site, the Patreon and website, everything in the podcast description. So there's other stuff there for people.
All right.
But yeah, this was awesome.